Okay, so we've been in the midst of this series, The Death of God, these little interactions and stories we have with the divine where we walk away with maybe a little piece of what we thought we understood has changed a little bit, died in front of us. And we've had to watch it be resurrected in a completely new way. We've looked at last week the silence, not the expectations being met. We've seen when God acts in ways we were unsure that's how he would act. And today we look at another way that God acts in a way that maybe we weren't expecting. And we're going to tear it apart a little bit. I want to read the entire passage. So if you can, turn to Mark chapter 11, verses 11 through 18. Page 1691. Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts, and he looked around at everything, but since he was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So he goes into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, that's next week. He looks around at everything, and then he leaves and goes back because he got there late in the day. He had got delayed, the airport was busy, who knows? This is what's happening here. And so the next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry, and seeing in a distance a fig tree and leaf, he went and to see if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it wasn't the season for figs. And he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And the disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, he entered the temple courts and began driving out those that were buying and selling. He overturned tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the courts. And he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed with his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. So again, we encounter something in the divine that maybe we had a picture of the way Jesus is supposed to act, and we're surprised by what really happens. What is it that surprises you about God that makes you readjust, change, and continue to grow? For today, I'm going to sit with you in the scene. You with me? Sometimes I'm up here and we stand outside of the scene and we analyze and we figure out what's going on. We're going to sit in the scene today. I'm going to do it with you. This scene of Jesus cleansing the temple, flipping over tables. John tells us he made a braided cord into a whip and he whipped people out of the temple as well. And so we're going to sit inside this scene a little bit together. So this is now participatory for just a second, and then we'll dive into it. How many of you would be consider yourselves you're naturally wired to love justice? Right? Okay, I close my eyes. Everyone can close your eyes. We don't have to look. Then everyone can do whatever they want. Right? I put it inside our mission statement. Know God, love neighbor, live justice. That went with love, judge, justice sometimes, but I got it in there a little bit. I think I'm naturally wired to want to see justice come to go. You're going to love this scene. If you had your hand in the air, you're going to love it. You're going to love this scene a whole lot. But you'll miss it if you read it wrong. If you come to it as someone who's watching Jesus do something to somebody else, then you're going to miss what's really happening in the subtext of this text a little bit. And you'll walk away with observations about what's right and what's wrong and how we use anger to justify those things. If you look at it, at what Jesus is doing to the temple, maybe not to the people, then you'll miss the important part of the story as well. You'll see it as some kind of statement about Jesus himself being the temple instead of needing a physical temple. So instead, we're going to enter into it a little bit, and we're going to not be Jesus or a disciple or like a random bystander, but we're going to sit down in the temple behind a booth with a banner over the top, and we're going to be one of the money changers. That's where we're going to sit today. We're going to be a money changer. Okay, everyone say, "I am a money changer." There you go. We're going to see ourselves not as an innocent bystander, watching Jesus do something to somebody else, but you're going to see him walk into this most holy place, the holy side of religion, and he's going to walk straight towards your booth. So he's walking towards you and your booth. And I think it's going to change our interaction with the story a little bit. To help us situate ourselves to what we're going to do with this. Did anyone watch Tiger King on Netflix? Yeah? hands, watch it, okay? For anyone who doesn't know, he runs an illegal zoo. I guess you could call it a zoo. And he has a bunch of very exotic animals that you probably shouldn't tame without knowing what you're doing. There's, of course, someone gets injured during the zoo, and it's a famous scene from it. I am never going to financially recover from this. That's like the famous scene from the thing. He takes these wild animals, and he puts them inside the zoo, and he raises them in captivity, and he goes in, and he does tricks with the lion. It's really rather wild to watch this happen. And one of the things that I think we forget a lot of times with these wild animals that we put into a zoo is deep down they can still be pretty wild. I believe a couple weeks ago, a press release went out that the curator, head of the Indianapolis Zoo, had his finger bit off by an orangutan that he was feeding. If you've never seen the famous YouTube video of the guy in Jamaica, one of the Jews in Jamaica, and the lion rips his finger off when he's doing a trick with it, they still could be pretty wild. Okay? But I think of the opposite of this as well, where if they've been in captivity long enough, they may seem pretty wild in there, but they don't tend to readjust to the actual wild terribly well. I looked everywhere for it, and I cannot remember what it's from, so one of you, I'm going to describe the scene, you're going to go, oh, that's from Parks and Recreation or something. They capture a bird, and they heal it and raise it, and there's this whole big celebration where they're going to go out to release it back to the wild. They've healed it, and so they go, "You're free!" And the bird flies off, and it goes this way, and a hawk goes whoop and just takes the bird and kills it instantly. They just don't reacclimate terribly well to the wild. It's really hard to take something truly wild and tame it, and then be like, "You're still wild and scary." You know what I mean? Lions, when they stop hunting for a while, they might still bite a finger, but that lion, the new one at the zoo, I'm really excited to go see the new one. He came from Michigan. Really excited. He probably wouldn't do too terribly well in the plains of Africa. You with me? What we do with once wild animals, right, and we tame them, they become a little bit boring. Would you rather see a giraffe, doing the galloping thing, in the plains of the, or is the giraffe at the Fort Wayne Zoo cooler, right? You'd be like, seeing a giraffe gallop around would be pretty cool. Seeing a lion, doing its thing it's hard to tame it. You can do all you want to it, but it's hard to make it still interesting. We make wild things more boring. And this makes me think about what we do with the divine, right? That we go into the wild and we bring God into the Tiger King Zoo. We put him inside of there, and we make contemporary religion out of this sort of image. We entangle God so that he can only answer when the right leaders ask the right questions. You got to do all those things. There's never anything God does that we can't explain. One of the things that I say all the time, and I do this on Wednesdays, I go, I don't have the answer to a lot of things. It's my limitations there are limits to me explaining divine to you. I hit a wall. I become weary of people who work in ministry that have the answer to everything. They make me nervous. Because you've boxed in the divine in a way that it's perfectly packaged. And if you're the only one who knows all the answers, it makes me a little trepidatious, right? I get a little nervous about that. There's never anything God does that can't be explained, especially by the people who are in charge, the guys with the collars, or however they want him to be, right? We have categories for God the moment that he acts. And we put it inside those categories and walls. And the problem is, that's really great. We like structure, we like order. But the older you get with a God that's always boxed in the walls, that gets fed at noon every single day, and you can give a zoo coin and get some lettuce and hand it to him, and it's really fun, is eventually it gets really boring. Charlie used to love the zoo, still likes it, but she would run to the giraffes. And she would do lettuce all day. When she was 1, she had a shirt that had some frilly green on it, and the giraffe licked her thinking her shirt was lettuce, right? And she used to just love it. And now she'll feed a giraffe, but it's not as cool. The cool has kind of left the building. You with me? You box it up enough, and it's only been a couple years for her. But me feeding a giraffe, I'm yeah, I've seen this trick before. It gets boring. You with me? We do the same thing. You make God boring. You box him into some way. God never gets older. He never hurts us. That's good news, right? But if he can't do any of those things, if we have all those answers, the kind of bad news is he can't also hurt people who are bad. Like, we've boxed him into such a way he can't hurt us, but he also can't do anything to anybody else either, because that would contradict anything about him. He's too boring to do anything fun or interesting. He's neutralized, stripped of the wild and the unimaginable. Right? What do you do with a God that is now inside of a cage in Tiger King Zoo? A few years ago, there was a Pew study that came out, and it looks like American Christianity, people who profess even a tiniest bit of belief that they're slightly less agnostic than they are Christian, number has stayed really consistent for the last 30 or so years. Like, the number of people in America who would say they have even the tiniest bit of belief in God has been pretty consistent over those years, last 40 or 50 years. It's a big decline. It's been a decline, but it's not as bad as what it would seem. But here's what is weird about it. What has changed is the God that we do believe in over this time. It's changed in the last 30, 40 years in some ways. And I'll say them, and you'll track with me on this one. One of the big shifts is we took God from being a God that's holy, say God is holy. Okay, good. And we've made him that God is love. Okay, so he was, and now he's love. You with me? This is one of these big shifts. Now the Bible says the center of God's being is, but it's a, say it again, the center of God's being is a holy love. That's kind of those two together. It used to be that we emphasized the holy part of that sentence, and we said nothing about good. Now we've returned this favor, and we say a whole bunch about his, and a little bit less about his, yeah. We've made a little bit of a shift. God is love. See that a lot of places. You don't see a lot anymore about God's holiness. Those two go hand in hand together. If you listen to sermons, songs, testimonies, I am a perpetrator, I guess. That's not the word I'm looking for. It makes me sound like I'm dangerous, right? I do this. I shift this way. If this is a spectrum, I'm over here a little bit, right? I do that a little bit. If you listen to worship songs and these things that are coming out today, you get this heavy focus on someone whose life it's fragile and tired, but the thing that has saved them is they have found the love of God that's what you get. That's this connection there. You hear that God has accepted them and empowered them, and they feel more worthy in his presence. That's a major shift from where we were. That it was the holiness, it was his otherness, it was that brought us in. And I'll explain this a little bit more. The second one will make this seem more visible. That's one of our big shifts. The second one is that we moved from a God that was primarily distant and separate to one that is primarily within us and is like us. So distant and different is really what I want to say, and within and the same. You with me with this one? Distant, separate, distant, different, together, same. Okay, that's another shift that's happened. A God that primarily is distant and different, and now together and same. We were tired of a God that was so far off and powerful that he couldn't possibly be vulnerable. He's so that way that we just couldn't possibly understand the vulnerabilities of it. And we also needed the God that could walk into the storm and not just calm it, right? But that had the power, the authority, right? He could do all those things. Right? We're weary of the God that could change a narrative without living in the narrative. In this distant God, how could he walk in and change the narrative? So what we needed was a God that was planted right next to the evil. We had this distant God that do all these things, but how could he walk into the storm and do it? So we had to get him closer to us and more like our experiences. So this is the second major shift. This resulted in a God that is far more personable than over here, but he's way more tame than this one. That's way more tame. So we made him loving, but we don't talk about discerning as much anymore. I lost my brain. I slipped my page. There we go. Yeah, he's tame. We made him loving, but he's no longer discerning. He can't tell anyone if it's right or wrong what they're doing. because he really doesn't say too much about it, because he doesn't want to offend people. That's over here. This one, distant, different. He's going to say how different you are. This one, well, I've walked in your shoes. I know the experience. I know, maybe just whatever. You with me on this one? The result to that is that whether he's loved or not, this one really just wants to be liked. You with me? I don't care if you love God. He just wants to make sure he's liked. There's no offense over there. And so something tells me that this is different than the God that shows up in our Bible, right? One is kinder and gentler and more tolerant of other things. He's like a mom, right? And you've got a couple kids, and they grow up and they leave, right? They go do their own thing. They grow up. David, Eric, we're all different. My mom, they're moving, and she had on her washing machine some pictures that she wrote my name on the back of them. Now, I famously have no pictures of me as a child. When you're the 7th, they don't care anymore. When they had to send a picture of me at 1 year old into preschool or something, she sent a picture of my brother Eric. Like, that's a true story. So she goes, these are you. And I said, that is David. And she goes, no, it's you. And I go, that baby is David. So after all my siblings came in, I said, Michelle, who is this? She goes, that's David. I was like, Mom, who is this? She goes, it's not you. We grow up, we move, we're very different. David and I are very different people. He's been in Hawaii for like the last 9 years, I think, on spring break. He's been there, he somehow missed out helping them move. He timed his vacation brilliantly. Fantastic. He's probably going to listen to this, I think, maybe. Congratulations. We're all different. They grow up, we do different things. And sometimes when it's Easter, we'll all still go to Huntington and we'll smile. And we'll go eat Chinese food at the worst Chinese restaurant that has literally ever existed in the history of the entire universe in Huntington. Like, I swear to you, 2 years ago we ate there, I think 9 of us got food poisoning. Like, it was... I made that up. But you believed me, right? It's that place where you're like, why do they also have fried chicken? Like, you're a Chinese buffet. Like, let's stick to the hits here. We grow up, we move on, we become different. We move away. But we still will come home every once in a while, and we'll do the things that we know that the person likes. We'll say how much we love them. But we're older, we're maturer, we have minds of our own, and we change how we perceive things. And so this is what we do with this God thing. We've grown up, we have left behind some of these older notions, we've attached onto other things, and we'll still hear this other stuff, but we've got minds of our own, we've figured different things out. How did this happen? How do we correct our overcorrection that has happened here? Well, it starts with an idea of a God that was powerful but not vulnerable. This is where we started. We're very powerful but not vulnerable. He was really strong, but he wasn't necessarily loving, and he didn't exactly know us well. And then all of a sudden, we run into Jesus in the gospel. And this love, close, human Jesus just washes over you like it's exactly what you've been waiting for, like you needed it, right? And it occurs that God is really like Jesus. That this distant, Old Testament-y, smitey one is really Jesus. And we latch onto that real hard. You with me so far? And we go, God is really like Jesus. And therefore, Jesus is the same as God. So we've now changed this perception. I'm going to get there, I promise. The problem is that we complete that cycle because we're so much smarter than we think we are. And we say, if God is really like Jesus, then Jesus is God. And if I'm like Jesus, then Jesus is me. Do you hear the overcorrection all of a sudden? If God is Jesus, and Jesus is God, and I'm like Jesus, then Jesus is like me. We overcorrect. Ash and I watch a lot of basketball. I stayed up late last night to watch Houston come back to knock out the Duke Blue Devils. I'm excited. Really the world wins when Duke loses. It's a great day. It's a great day. Former coach Kelvin Sampson of IU. And so we watch basketball, though, and anytime there's a pretty average free throw shooter going up, if they shoot their first free throw and it hits the front of the rim, I don't even have to say anything. It'll hit the front of the rim. I'll go like this to Ashley. I'll look over to her, and she goes, he's going to brick the next one. They overcorrect. Bad free throw shooters overcorrect. You hit the front of the rim, you're making sure you're not going to hit the front of the rim next time, right? Well, Blake's a good free throw shooter. But you'll watch, Shaquille O'Neal hits the front of the rim on a free throw. His next one's hitting the backboard. You know what I mean? They overcorrect. There's too much correction. If you're not a good free throw shooter, you're definitely not going to airball it a second time. You know what I mean? They overcorrect. Humans like to overcorrect things. This is what we've done. We've overcorrected. We've gone so far from the God that's different to us, the one that's very personable and is always the same. So every now and then, it's a good thing to remember that we can't understand Jesus all the way. Everyone, I want you to say, we can't understand Jesus all the way. Okay, good. Well, and you can't understand the Old Testament until you read Jesus. You can't understand the God of the Old Testament until you understand Jesus. You can't know the God of the Old Testament until you understand Jesus. But it is really important to remember that the opposite of that is also very true. You cannot understand Jesus until you understand the God of the Old Testament. And you realize that everything you see God doing in the Old Testament, Jesus is capable of. And that gets us to the story of Jesus in the temple. No one knows why Jesus did this. What possessed him to waltz into the temple and flip over tables and make braids of cords and whip people out of it? We don't know the exact thing that got him riled up about it. But it is a really powerful scene. It's one of the only scenes that appears in all 4 Gospels. And it's really instructive. And it's to remind those of us in this room that love justice that the other side of that anger, the other side of justice is anger, and that our anger is usually more unrighteous than righteous most of the time. We love justice. The flip side of justice is anger, and most of the time our justice is more like anger than righteousness. So if you find yourself ever using the cleansing of the temple as a way to justify your own cleansing of other people's temples, a few notes about Jesus in this scene. He's not passive-aggressive. Did you catch that? He wasn't terribly subtle in his flipping over tables and whipping people. That seems pretty aggressive. He didn't walk into the temple and smile at the money changers and then go leave a 1-star review on social media about their practices, right? Whatever he would have said or done to them in private, he said and did to their faces. You with me? The anger is always corrective. This is the other thing. He taught people. He flips the tables, he whips them out, and then he says, "Don't you people remember what it says? That my Father's house should be a house for all people, yet you have made it into a den of thieves?" He's not just ranting when he says this. Did I mark it? I think I marked it in here. I did. Good. He's not just ranting. I want to hear how Mark says this here. He says, and he taught them, saying. So he's whipped them, he's done all this stuff, and then they're all listening, and he's like, all right, I'm going to explain a little bit. He's flipping the tables as an object lesson. It's not just a fit of rage. It says after he cleanses it, the lame and the blind, who, by the way, are not allowed in the temple, okay? The lame and the blind come to him, and he cleansed them. So Jesus' anger, while real, was not the end of it. There's instruction, and there's final action behind it. He doesn't intend to work righteousness with anger. Anger is a very first step in what he does. There's still teaching and healing to be done. Are we good there? No passive-aggressive, and it's not the final step. Good? Okay. While he did get angry, Jesus is not an angry person. He did get angry. He was never angry over principles like justice and fairness or holiness. He got angry when people were hurt. It was always people that Jesus defended, not the truth. You don't need to defend truth. Truth defends itself. You stand for truth because in the end only truth stands. You don't defend it. It's there. It's its own judge. You defended people. The temple was a place where God met people. I've said this before, but just to recapture our imagery in here, there was no way for God to get into this world except through the temple. So if God wanted to access the world, he had to go through now with passion. Good. Okay, he had to go through and if you wanted to get to God, you had to go through the We're alive. Good. It's like a portal between heaven and earth. This Holy of Holies is like the portal between those two, where God and people connected. So the second thing is this. The money changers are an essential part of the temple process. There's some belief that they were cheating people, charging exorbitant rates. You could talk about that. You could do that if you'd like. That's a wonderful theory to preach on. But we don't know for sure if it's true. What we do know is that money changers did play an important part of the temple process itself. They helped poor people find a way to sacrifice. So if you don't have enough to have an animal that you can get rid of, because I only have one goat or whatever, you could buy one for the temple at a pretty reasonable price if it was being done the way it was supposed to be done. You could purchase doves. You could purchase little grains of rice of wheat to be burned, and they could be part of the sacrifice. The other thing that they do is they're able to convert pagan money to coin that's acceptable in the temple. So if you are a Roman living in Rome and you've got Caesar's imprint on your gold coins, they can exchange it for gold coins that don't have the icon of a person who claims he's the divine that you can then use in the temple as well. And so when you think about money changers, they're not necessarily people who are gaining the system or being predatory. They're just people. You're in your booth. Do you think you're a predatory person sitting in your booth? No, you're a good money changer, right? You're sitting there, and they're surrounded by this religious system, and you're an essential part of this system. And the system you work in is working really well. It's working really well. And that's the problem. You ready? That's the problem. It's working so good. It's just, boy, it's working good. There's two flaws. Two flaws in what happens in this moment before Jesus comes in and flips tables. See, over time, money changers were part of the commercialization of the temple religion itself. They'd found a way to monetize sacrifice in some way. Not intentionally, not in like a cheating way, but these were unintended consequences of a system that was working exceptionally well. Can't infer evil intentions. But slowly over time, the system and the structure of Israel's worship had become so perfect and so automatic, and everyone knew their booth, where they go. Everyone knows this thing, that over time it's so perfect and so automatic, and it works so well that when the presence of God walks into the temple in Jerusalem, no one noticed. Are you with me on this one? They're still just selling doves. The incarnate God walks into the temple and nothing happens. That should be alarming. This whole thing, remember, if you're God, how do you access the people? Where's the presence of God? It's in the and if you're a person who needs to connect to God, you need to go to the because that's where the presence is. The whole thing is built around this is where the presence of God is. And the presence of God walks through the court of the Gentiles, and no one takes notice. But the system, the worship, that's working still. They're still selling doves. They're still exchanging money. And there comes a time where you just can't tweak it anymore. You with me? You just have to get a hold of it and flip it over. He's not going to tweak. Hey, psst, I'm Jesus, by the way. You with me? You can't tweak it anymore. It's too perfect. It's too oiled. You just got to throw a wrench in the whole darn thing and start over. So he flips it. And then the second problem. The temple had begun to layer people away from the presence. I've talked about this before. There's the court of the Gentiles. That's as close as you could get. Inside of that is the court of the Jewish women. Inside of that is the court of the men. Inside that, the court of the priests. And then the court of the high priest, where the Holy of Holies is. So you just can't get any closer. They're just walled out as a little bit farther from the most holy place. So in other words, Israel's worship had begun to get layered. So they couldn't get to the presence of God, and they were stuck getting nothing without having to pay for it or have somebody else do it for them. Israel were the standard bearers. They had standards. There was always in Israel's mind an ethnic difference between Jews and Gentiles. There was a major difference between being a man and a woman. There was an economic difference between free people and slaves. There's a ritual difference between priests and laities. And the temple celebrated these things. But these differences never existed in God's mind. They were arbitrary distinctions between people who preferred this or didn't prefer that. You can go as far back as Abraham. Genesis 17:12. I won't even bother reading it. But God says, everyone who's with you, all of them get sacrificed into the family. Or circumcised into the family. That would have had a very different meaning. And so if you listen there, it's hundreds of years before the temple's built to keep walls up and separate these things. In God's mind, they were already all one. All the people following you, Abraham, everyone, no matter who they are, all will be circumcised into the family. You with me? The temple becomes layered, and there comes a time when you just can't play that game anymore. And so Jesus says, it's written in my Father's house that this will be a house of prayer for all nations. And he made it a living room for Jews to sit in. The church needs to go through a temple cleansing again. It's needed it for a long time. It's needed it for a long time. Because we've commercialized God, packaged him in a way he's tame and sellable. A system that glorifies personalities and turns you into a consumer of religion. You got to find the one that's boxed right at the right sale price for yourself, that doesn't have the color you don't like in it. You with me? You use the experiences you've got as the pretext, and you package those experiences into liturgies, contemporary, traditional, different denominations. I'm talking to everybody here. It's like, I'll include us in it. I'm including everyone in this. You complained you can't find God in certain styles of music or in certain different things. It's not my style. And you got to start asking the question, is your style God? I have to ask that question quite often. A good temple cleanse would be good for the church worldwide. We've attracted crowds and we've put them into big buildings and we've customized those things to our preferences, but you haven't drawn anyone into Jesus. Ryan Gurnan, a good friend of mine, once told Dave Arnold, who was the pastor of the church at the time, he told Dave, because Dave said, we need some more kids in the youth group. And Gurn said, I can get you 200 kids at youth group. They won't learn anything, but I can get them here. Are you with me on this same idea? We've packaged people in and not given them Jesus. We've drawn them into a way of Jesus, but we've not drawn them into the way of Jesus. We've called them in to come and die. We've not called them in to come and die. Instead, they're discipled by every other thing you could think of, until only what's important to you, yourself, is peculiarly the same thing that's important to God. It's interesting. It always ends up that way. We've got agendas and values, but we don't ask the questions anymore. We've accepted the packaging that's been given. The views we have about money, sex, love, marriage happen to be the exact views as the place we sit. Isn't that just how that always works? Maybe it's time for us to flip tables again. We create series of barriers, real, invisible, that prohibit people from entering all the way in. We haven't forbidden women. We've not forbidden the lame, the blind, the poor, the less educated. But they just can't seem to find their way all the way in sometimes. So maybe it's time for God to cleanse the temple again. What temple should he cleanse first? And this is where we're going to leave it today. Well, bad news, everyone. I read through this with Ashley last night, and she said, well, I don't like the way that ended. I got bad news for everyone. Say bad news. When it says what temple to clean first, the Bible says that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Hi, everyone. Hi, my little temples. Hello. Never forget that. What you want God to do in a church starts inside of you first. We've worshipped one thing with our mouth and done other things with our bodies and our money. We've been hard and critical towards people and held them to high standards that maybe we ourselves don't even keep. We've sat in the temple in the presence of God and honored him with our lips, but where hearts sit far. Maybe it's time for God to clean that temple first. We've talked about this through this whole thing, and it's been a thing. We talk a lot about justice, and we have high standards for what I think the church should be doing. And until we become critical of ourselves, it's hard to be critical of everything else. I've been to all kinds of churches, but the churches where I have made and seen the biggest difference or impact is places where those churches have such a high view of God, I am in awe. of how much they have it. That when they speak of God, it's like another tone comes out of their voice. I've been in churches where I don't speak the same language that is being preached from the pulpit, that I have felt more presence of God than I have in other churches. We need a vision of God that makes us fall down and be a little bit fearful. Famous little refrain from the scriptures, holy, 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 as the Lord God Almighty, the earth is full of his glory. We need a vision that makes us not feel worthy, but makes us feel maybe a little bit more unworthy, so that afterwards we can be a little bit more worthy. Not one that says we're better than we think, but one that says we may be worse off than we really think we are. We need a higher vision. And that starts with cleansing ourselves so we can flip tables where it still needs to happen. Let's pray.